Oftentimes when I think about the topic of Sasquatch, there are two factors that come to mind. Those being, number one, geographical location, and number two, the people searching for it. These two factors are integrally tied to the Sasquatch mystery and our attempt to understand it. Viable habitat found across the continent would be crucial to something like Sasquatch to inhabit, and certainly something that is worth looking into when researching the topic. Aside from location, human beings are arguably the largest factor involved in the topic of Sasquatch. In order to have sightings, you need people to have seen a Sasquatch. This is very often what spurs on others to research the subject, either relying on their own encounter or the many eyewitness reports that exist from across North America. Throughout my travels on Bigfoot Beyond the Trail, I've visited many locations and talked to so many researchers, so I wanted to create a video that focused on just those things. Join me as I highlight some of these promising geographical regions and hear from the people who research in those areas.
Maine's terrain is extremely varied. We have, rolling fields, rolling hills, we have mountains, we have Katahdin, and then the western mountains that sort of lead up towards the White Mountains in New Hampshire. We are rife with water sources. There's a whole network of lakes and rivers and streams and bogs that sweeps all the way down across the state because of the mostly because, I would assume, because of glacial erosion way back in the history, and that is all still collecting these really great water systems that all the wildlife in the state lives off of. Bigfoot in Maine is probably one of the state's biggest secrets up until this point. I think until Finding Bigfoot showed up a few years ago to talk to people about it, most people didn't think about it. Bigfoot in Maine is not something people commonly spring to in their minds. They're more likely to associate it with the Pacific Northwest. As soon as you start talking to people about it, you find that there are actually a fair number of people sprinkled through the population who have had encounters that don't match any of the large mammals that are endemic to the state.
The woods are dark and deep, as they say, and there seems to be something in there. As it gets into Bigfoot, if somebody has a real life experience with it, or they know somebody they trust that has, they're not going to care whether you have a suit on or have government after your name. So that's part of what being a Mainer is. They're very much independent thinkers. They don't want to be told what to do and think about that.
There are a lot of people who have had inexplicable encounters that they still don't want to talk about. But the people I have talked to, most of them have had kind of accidental encounters, stuff where a person and something large and hairy crossed paths where they weren't planning on meeting each other. There's a lot of that. There are a few people who live or hike regularly in certain areas that notice patterns over time. So there's a little bit of that too. I interviewed over 20 people for the book. I think there's 20 in the book, and those are all really interesting accounts that kind of add a piece to the puzzle of what's going on around the state, and only, a tiny portion of the state, because so much of Maine is uninhabited and forested that I'm sure there's plenty of stuff going on that nobody ever runs across. There are definitely a few accounts that really stand out to me. One is a father and son who had an encounter, both very clearly, broad daylight, saw something tall, covered in hair, bipedal, walking out of the woods where they were at the riverbank fishing. Saw them, they saw it, and it just kept going back into the woods. It's gone back about his business, and they, of course, reeled up their lines, packed everything up, got back in the truck, and drove back home, and didn't talk about it for a while. So, so that was a really interesting one. That was in a very remote area. I have a friend who has family members that work the woods, and he knows they've seen, you know, mysterious things that they can't explain, but they don't want to talk about them. These are people who are working in these remote areas just on their own. You know, there's nothing they can do about it. Having to cope with that on top of doing a dangerous job in the first place that's enough to keep you quiet about something and just not want to deal with it. So it would be exciting if a few people decided they did want to talk about it. And I mean, also the ridicule factor is always there. I know a lot of the people that did wind up talking to me for the book are getting to the point where they're retired now. They're not worried so much about what people think about them. They know what they saw. They have no question in their minds. It's stayed with them for decades in some cases and has not gone away. It's as clear as day in their minds. And so now they're okay with sharing it, whereas like if I did my book even 15 years ago, I think most of them wouldn't have talked to me. And some of them are other people who it takes time to process something like this, because I feel like it changes your worldview entirely. It's not just like seeing a bird you've never seen before. It is much bigger, much more significant. Like a fair amount of the people I talked to, even if they were with another person, they didn't talk about it again for a decade or 2 or 3 or 4. Even now, sometimes the other person still won't talk about it. It's human nature, and it's unfortunate that there is a ridicule factor, because I mean, this is all another piece of the puzzle.
This place is, as everyone refers to it, the Mecca of Bigfooting. People come here from all around the world to experience the Bigfoot phenomena. They've done it for decades. So me coming here, I'm just a small little piece of this tiny little puzzle trying to contribute to it all. You come here, you get to see the history. You get to see that this forest really has character to it. It's almost as if we were mentioning, as if these trees could talk. You know, you can actually almost feel the energy coming off of them from all the stories you've heard, the stories that you've read about as a child. Everything you've heard about Bigfoot isn't in some place far in the Pacific Northwest anymore. It's right down the creek. It's on the edge of camp. It's down that ridge right there. These are the stories that you grew up with. These are the stories that are told around the world. So its historical significance and also its current significance is very important to the entire Bigfoot phenomenon.
I grew up watching the Patterson-Gimlin film as a little kid, and like being able to go to that area where I was watching that film growing up, it's really surreal. And then when you get more involved learning about the whole subject, you realize that area is just more rich in history than just the film itself. You have the Jerry Crew trackways, then you have the Laird Meadow, Roger Patterson casted some tracks there. Then, not to mention, you have the Pacific Northwest expedition held by Tom Slick at Louse Camp. There's something surreal about being in the area that all these famous things have happened, and it's super. I don't want to say magical, but that's kind of the best way to describe it, really.
It's just so much opportunity for Bigfooting, for discovering these wild places. The Klamath region is really special to me, and of course all the recorded history that came around here at Louse Camp and the Bluff Creek area, like that just adds to it and amplifies it tenfold. There's a really big dynamic here. It's dangerous. I mean, I was fortunate that first time I was up here to have somebody want to like take me under their wing and show me the area and talk to me and spend days with me. And then I was fortunate again when I came up here the first time I was in Laos camp. So what I have to say is this is a whole nother country. This is not pull up to your state park and dive off to the side on a little logging road in a national forest and then do your knocks and your whoops. These are dangerous roads with shifting gravel, with rolling and falling rocks and stuff like that. I don't want to discourage people, but you definitely need to be in the Bigfoot community and talk with those representatives, those individuals that have been out here, that have done stuff like what we've done for multiple days going into weeks. There's a degree of real life danger there. And even going to an area that's unspoilt by the dangers of man, still have mountain lion, bear, rattlesnakes. So you really have to walk softly, carry a big stick, and know what you're up against out here.
The Bluff Creek Project was initially to find the Patterson-Gimlin film site. They wanted to go out there and try and locate where it's at because there was ideas of where it was at, and you had people like Cliff Beckman and M.K. Davis going out there, and they kind of had their own sites, and so did Daniel Perez. But Steven Strufer and Robert Leiderman and Ian Carton kind of went out there and really found the film site. They were looking for stumps that you see in the film and the big trees.
My role was videographer. I was there just to capture the moment, videotape what was going on, maybe ask some questions. And I got suckered in. I guess I got suckered down the rabbit hole on that one. But originally I had done some videos and I thought it'd be kind of cool to capture the essence of the investigation. And so I ended up being a player. So that all started about 2010. And then we started investigating it. And we had like 5 locations that were like top of the list. One of them was an area that N.K. Davis was talking about, which was downstream from where you used to drive down, and from the berm you drive all the way down. And it was downstream, probably about a good quarter mile-ish. And the other one was the Peter Burnside, which is right where you used to build the park. And then you go upstream, and you remember that you kind of had to cross the creek a little bit on the way down, but that blank area that's all opened up, that was pretty much the Christopher Murphy location, which he describes in his books.
They eventually found it and confirmed it. I think it was shortly after finding Bigfoot was there, they really kind of were for sure that that was the film site.
The first time I went to the film site was actually in 2011 with finding Bigfoot. I'd gone down to scout it. I didn't know where it was, but I fell into the project with Robert and Steven, and they snuck me in by looking at the Murphy book, actually, and looking at the frame-by-frame progression of the subject itself. And I got interested. And a couple of months later, we were down here doing the site survey. But I had actually gone to the site during the 2011 Finding Bigfoot, Birth of a Legend, with the whole crew. We walked down there. Cliff and Bobo kind of knew where it was. And we took Bob Gimlin there. He recognized it as the spot. When I was standing on the bank, I was like, there's no way this is the place. It doesn't look anything like the film. 2 months later, when I was with Robert and Steven, we were starting that grid plot. We got all the way across. I saw the trees. I recognized the trees. I got more excited about it then.
See those flags right down there?
Yep.
That is where, per Renee DeHinden's measurements, our sight lines that we've created with frame 352, which lines up the pool cue, smiley face, and then we found a new log that has a fir branch sticking up that's still there, that's in the foreground of frame 352. Since we got that new measurement, and the reason we got a new measurement is we've cleaned up this since 2012, which is when Bill Munns was here and he did all of his measurements to figure out where Roger was. We cleared this out more. So what we did was we created better sight lines and better paths to pull our tape measures. Right here, it's all lit up perfect for you.
That's in one of the frames, huh?
That's in frame 352, and it's in the foreground. So this is a big old fir log. Fir is what's saving us at this site. Fir stumps is what's left. That's how we verified the site, is per mostly the stumps and some of these big log debris, like over there, back over here, and then right here. So what I just showed you is that little stump, that log right there, there's the branch. See how it's lit up and it's kind of pointing right up to the smiley face?
Smiley's right behind it, yeah.
Yeah, so that's what's still there. That's the one I found in 2018. Now we have smiley face there, and then we go up and we have pool cue. So look at here. Oh, he broke again. Oh my gosh. So over the years, there's the pool cue right up in there.
Oh yeah.
So he was dead. It was dead in 1967. And every year, well, about every year, every other year, what happens is water fills up, it gets down to a rotted point, and then it breaks. So over the years, it's gone from, you can see the top of it right there. Right there, yeah. So I think it's probably 6 years ago, 7 years ago, it was broken down to there, and then it's broken down to there. Now it's broken again, right there. So this will eventually come down because it's just a dead tree.
I mean, I think the swamp is the perfect setting, you know, to host these stories of an undiscovered creature of various sorts. You know, obviously Florida is known for the skunk ape, and once you come out to these environments, you know, you almost envision seeing something primordial. You know, it's just something about the brackish waters, the dwarf palmettos, the cypress, the Spanish moss. It just evokes that sort of sense of mystery. Florida obviously has more swamps than most any place. So naturally, these environments provide a rugged habitat, a place where there's plenty of food and water, something that could support a large creature. And, you know, perhaps not coincidentally, that's where we're getting a lot of reports. And, you know, if you look at the history of Bigfoot reports over the years, Florida is way up there. I mean, you kind of think of this as something pertaining to the Pacific Northwest, but Florida competes very well with the numbers of sightings. And I think that these environments are, you know, just a perfect place.
Watching YouTube, someone said, you know, one channel just mentioned, you just got to get off the couch and go look for yourself. And I went, well, they're all in the Pacific Northwest. Well, everybody says. And so I went out in Florida and started going around, and I was totally surprised. I mean, I've heard the vernaculars that, you know, by, you know, swampland in Florida. Living here my whole life, it never meant anything to me. But when you get on these roads, even 275, I-75, 301, whatever, it's just woodlands after woodlands of preserves and state parks. And the more you get out into these parks, like the river behind me, and my new strategy is kayak, remote places, no more trails, just pushing back, even if it's not too far. The more I see, to make it longer, the more you believe there's something easily could move through this area. It's just too, you know, people go, oh, Florida, you know, even where you're looking at, it's 2 miles wide. You know, you can get lost in 2 miles wide, and you can be. I even talked to a ranger the other day, and on this river, someone went from one stop to another stop. It was 2 miles, and they left at 7 a.m. They got picked up 7 a.m. the next morning, because when this river's high, you can't tell if you're not trained and, you know, to look at the flow. You can get into a tributary or a creek and think you're on the river, and you're not. And next thing you know, you're twisted up, and, you know, it turns into a rescue situation.
The Ocala National Forest is located in central North Florida, and it's kind of a place that is a bridge between sort of the forested areas that are north in Georgia and kind of transitioning to that more swampy environment. And Ocala has a long history of sightings of skunk ape, And so when I came to Florida several years ago, I had the opportunity to go there and do some camping and exploration. So obviously I took advantage of that. And the Ocala National Forest, to me, is one of my favorite places I've been, because it really does have everything you need as far as sightings of Bigfoot creatures. Myself and my longtime research partner Cindy Lee were there in January, and we camped out, and one night we were just doing some hiking, walking back through there, kind of on some of the trails and then kind of off the trails. And it was a perfect setting because there was no one else out there. It's like we had the whole place to ourselves. It was completely deserted, really quiet, so it was a perfect time to get in there and to see what we could see. We were, a couple of miles into there off the camp. We'd been hiking for a while. I heard what sounded like something hitting on a can, which obviously when you're sort of in a secluded place like that, there was nobody else out there, it stands out like, what is this? So we listened a moment, and it kind of started off and on, and you could hear it. And in my mind, of course, I pictured something, hitting it with a stick. It was kind of a pinging noise. So I said, well, hey, this may be an opportunity to figure out what this is. So I took the flashlight and I said, wait here. She stood up on the trail, and I kind of plunged into the woods and took that light and shined it. Well, as soon as I did, something moved. You could hear something running, and it immediately sounded like a large animal. So then I kind of stopped, and I put the light, waited a moment, kind of catch your breath. I didn't see it. So then I moved, another 20 yards moving in there. Again, the thing picked up and started running. And so the second time I heard it, I could tell, that it was indeed something big. I could tell it didn't sound like a deer. I've heard deer running or fleeting, and I don't want to say I could hear that it was running on two legs, but it kind of gave me that sense of something that was moving in that fashion. So again, I kind of scan around, don't see it. I move again another 10 or 15 yards, and the thing moves again. It just remained just out of sight enough to where I could never get that flashlight on it, but it was actively sort of stopping, and as soon as I would move, it would move. Just a little bit further, and of course I just had run off the path, and now I'm realizing, okay, I just ran into the woods, haven't been paying any attention where I'm going because I'm trying to pursue this thing, and again, eventually I realized there's no way I'm going to get up on this thing because it's actively trying to get away. And when you're in these environments, you think, oh, it'd be easy to see, but there's so much vegetation. It's so thick. And at night, there's so many shadows that there's just literally thousands of places for this thing to hide. And I had no chance against whatever this thing was. So finally, of course, I just said, well, I don't want to get lost in here. And I looked around, and I did find a can. I didn't find any tracks or anything. There's just too much leaf litter. You couldn't really see anything if something had walked there. But it was one of those times where, your blood's pumping, your adrenaline's flowing, and you're thinking, man, this is it, right? Any moment now, I'm going to put this flashlight on one of these creatures, and boom, there it is. But as these things go, it was just one step ahead of me. Well, I think, Florida is a great place, and I think there's a long history of sightings in this state. A lot of credible witnesses have seen something out of here, and I think it warrants more research and a continued persistence to, try and prove that there is something unique here, like the skunk ape. And I think if there was a place on Earth that could support a creature like this is one of those places. It's at the top of my list. I love to come here. I love to get out here in the woods and the swamps and take a look around, because I think one of these days somebody's going to get that proof everybody's looking for.
Well, West Virginia, specifically this this portion, Appalachia as a whole, you're going to see this along the Appalachian mountain range. But this specific section is extremely rugged. We are in the area that was a push-up area when the continents pushed apart. This section of our state was part of the upheaval zone. So we have this massive upheaval on the eastern front of our state. And then it looks like if you were to take a rug and crumple the rug up tight together, you have this ripple effect that trickles all the way through to the western side of the state. So on the eastern side, we have a massive upheaval with large valleys and expanse between the mountains. But the farther you get south and west in the state, the tighter together those ripples were. So our mountains here, where we're at right now, are extremely tight together. The valleys are extremely narrow, sometimes only the width of a creek, and then you're starting back up another mountain.
Pretty much the eastern third of the state is a national forest, which is nearly, it's not quite, but it's nearly 1 million acres. The deep valleys, you know, things can hide the abundance of water. Food sources are here, you know, whether it's deer, which a lot of folks, you know, say that that's the main food source, but we also have turkey, you know, a lot of wild edibles, berries, blueberries. We have cranberry glades, we have blueberry glades, you know, things like that.
Well, we are a very private group of people here in West Virginia for the most part. Yeah, we'll go out in the woods and spend some time out in the woods, but we're also not going to share a lot of those stories. You're going to have a hard time getting some of those stories out of people that have had these experiences, especially the ones that are in these more rugged areas. And these rugged areas are what are hospitable to these alleged Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Bigfoot, whatever we want to call them. We're looking at West Virginia as being, I think it's currently the third most forested state in the nation. We've got all this forest that has not been trampled upon. There's also a ton of old growth forest here. That kind of a forest is able to sustain life on a totally different level than a secondary or tertiary growth forest, because it's got these symbiotic relationships between the trees, amphibians, mushrooms, the berries. Everything is got this this style about it that it all thrives in these old growth forests. And those pockets of old growth, I think, are what attract and draw these creatures to live in this area particularly, because you have so much food available.
There's several that's been reported to BFRO. I've taken a few, but there's also some that you can find online that people talk about. One of the oldest ones I found online was from this area. It was in 1960. A group of campers were at their site. It was, I guess, later in the evening, and one of the fellows was off to the side. He was chopping up firewood to get the fire started, or add to the fire. I can't remember which. And he has his back toward the wooded area, and he feels a poke in his ribs, and he thinks it's one of his buddies messing around. And he turns around, and he's face to face with well, I can't say face to face because he probably wasn't that tall, but he's looking at this 7 to 8 foot tall creature, dark collared, and he large red eyes, and it's a hairy creature, and it turns and runs. Well, that's just been a story that I've heard a few times and found online. But then I took a report from a lady, anonymously. She sent it through an email. She didn't even give me her name, but it was in the same area, pretty much in the same area. It was in 1970, and her husband were driving along, and I guess it was it walked in the front of the truck, and that's what she talks about. It had big red eyes. And some people, I've heard they call it the canyon monster, because I guess, you know, this being the area where it's at. And then I took another one 2 years ago. It happened, but the sighting took place in 2014, and it was on the road leading from where we're at down into the Parsons area. And this lady was driving, going to work, and this thing walks across the road in front of her, across the guardrail, and it was a strange shape. She said she called it like a black Grinch, like the Grinch from Stole Christmas, and it had like a very big gut and real shiny black hair, and walking on 2 feet, and went across the guardrail, then over the hill.
Once I became public with actually being comfortable talking about my sighting. A lot of people started just gravitating and saying, oh, well, okay, well, even my grandmother, she was like, well, okay, since you've told me this, she told me about a sighting that she had when I was a kid. And she was taking classes, this is when computers were new, you know, and she was taking a free class over at a community college. And when she was on the way home, she had a creature walk across in front of her vehicle and go straight up the mountain. And she said it was on 2 legs, and she said it was like a big gorilla. So, you know, that we're looking at something like that. My family members started opening up, and then, you know, some of the other people that would just hear about the story. They'd be like, oh, well, I got something to tell you, you know, something like that. Then we started Wild and Weird Radio. And when we started Wild and Weird Radio, it really exploded. Because before that, we had people coming to us at the table. They would see the artwork, and some of the folks would approach the table and they'd see what we were producing. And they would be like, oh, you guys aren't just making pop culture art. You guys have seen something. We try to recreate and make art based off of the actual sighting reports. So that way it's as true to the subject as possible. All right, so this is just going to be a small sample of the best tracks that we have in our collection that we've cast going out into the field in either our research areas or where we've had sightings reported that we've gone to investigate and actually been able to turn up some physical evidence. These 2 right here were left and right that were from the Tenney incident in Kanawha State Forest. You got a really good rounded heel shape here, and you can see where the mid-tarsal breaks at. This one you can see the mid-tarsal break a little bit better because more planed out foot. This is a bear track, and so is this. These are tracks. We always put these out on the table because we let people see them, and we tell them that, you know, you've got 2 bears on the table. Try to find them. One's a give me. And this one is the one that a lot of people will confuse actually with a possible Bigfoot track, but it's absolutely a bear. Then these were found on a creek bank and going up a mountain. A raccoon stepped in the big toe here, and then here's the same foot. This is the same big toe that would have been there, but it was going up the hill. So I had to get creative with how I put the plaster in that one. It was all kind of slopped and smudged in there.
Oregon is the perfect habitat for Sasquatches. Obviously the Pacific Northwest in general is great. You have vast wilderness, you have lots of bear, lots of coyotes, and lots of other apex predators. So obviously that's really great habitat for Sasquatches. And then here at the North American Bigfoot Center, we're in Clackamas County that has the highest number of Bigfoot sighting reports in the whole state. So we get a lot of reports obviously around Mount Hood, but we chose our location, you know, for a reason, and that's why. Why not be in the middle of it all?
And another reason, I think probably more important than maybe even any of those, is the fact that we live here. We live here. So I mean, finding Bigfoot was great. I love traveling the country and the world, learning about Bigfoots everywhere I went. But really, at the end of the day, I'm most interested in the Sasquatches in my proverbial backyard. So we live close to here, so we want to study the Bigfoots that live close to here too. And that, to me, and at least that's a lot of the reason I think that this is the best location for us, because we're here too. We want to hear about our hairy neighbors in the woods. Heard some things out there, but it turns out that a guy who comes into the museum here has been working that spot for decades, and he's been pulling footprint casts and documenting his evidence in journals and through photographs, and it's close by, it's easy to get to. It's one of these spots that just is like a gem, essentially, because, you know, it's great to go travel 6 or 8 hours, and you can go to Bluff Creek all you want, but fact is the best spots are going to be the ones closest to your home that you can get to more frequently. You're going to be there more more often. You're going to learn about the habits of all the animals. You're going to learn the terrain and the roads faster. It's just going to be a better spot day in and day out. So now we've started looking at Easter Island as one of these spots. We probably hit it on a good week 2 or 3 times a week at times. And if that's the key to success, is getting out there and putting your boots on the ground as much as possible. And Easter Island is one of these locations that we're working it. We have other researchers working it. Our eyes are on this spot. So hopefully if anything significant comes out, we'll be made aware of it and we can get on it immediately.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the best things about our museum is the fact that we have like this built-in team of researchers that are actually following up on sighting reports like that. And it's nice that we can, we have a tracker, we have a bone guy, just really great people who are into the subject and are going to approach it scientifically.
Yeah, eyewitness accounts really aren't as valuable as most of the Bigfoot community thinks at the end of the day, because they're essentially words, and words disappear the moment you say them. What the value is for ongoing research, though, is a place and a time where a Sasquatch was. So basically a dot on the map. Unless, of course, the Sasquatch was seen doing something unusual, some sort of observation of a strange behavior. Maybe it was carrying something, maybe it was doing something unusual. That's always interesting. But there's so many subjective filters between the actual experience of observing a Sasquatch and what comes to my ears, or our ears. It's kind of problematic in a way. Another use, to me, the most valuable use of eyewitness reports are the recent ones, the ones that happened like, say, yesterday or 3 days ago, because then you can go to the location and maybe find evidence that isn't subjective like a sighting report is, but actually objective, where you can give it to a variety of experts and they can weigh in without really having to know the context. That's the real value, and I think that's where most of the Bigfoot community's efforts should be put now. Sure, there are reasons that the Pacific Northwest is excellent habitat for Sasquatches, and it largely has to do with food, water, and cover. But this whole idea that the Pacific Northwest is the best habitat, well, I think that's debatable, frankly. I think that the perception is skewed, basically, because the earliest researchers, the foundational researchers in this subject, all lived here, basically. And I think that they were writing from here, and it's always the people who write the history that get to frame the history, so to speak. The victors of the war write the history, in other words. And I think that that sort of thing is skewed, because right now there's all sorts of pockets all throughout North America that are producing good evidence for Sasquatches. Everybody looks at the Pacific Northwest like it's going to be the best spot for Bigfoot, and perhaps it is, because certainly there's probably more habitat here than anywhere else. But it's not the only, and it's also not the most productive. Frankly, I think it's harder to find Sasquatches in the Pacific Northwest than, say, Kentucky or Pennsylvania or places like that, because back there, the fishing holes are a lot smaller, shall we say.
Whitehall has become important in cryptozoology terms because it had landmark cases of Bigfoot encounters and so forth, which involved law enforcement agencies. I think part of the reasons that Whitehall is associated with Bigfoot is because we were able to almost put it under a microscope. And where you might have only a few sightings, we were able to turn up many. And that means that you could almost do this anywhere in the country. And we were fortunate because we had my father was a farmer in the region and everybody knew him. So that was like a key to get information from other people. So I think this is more a factor that we were able to do an in-depth study on this region. And the sightings continue. But I think if you went to almost any other region, you may be able to turn up a similar flux of reports. But what we do know from the data is that August, September, and October are very prevalent months in this region, and that this is where there are more sightings than other times of the year. So it's quite possible that these are migration routes. But then again, it's just a theory. When researching this topic, you come across what I call confirmation moments, where you have a sighting that's so important that it has details that aren't necessarily evident to even the observer. For instance, 2 Hong Kong nationals were fishing up near Dresden, Clemens area, New York, and they were fishing behind this tavern. And while they were fishing, they saw a ape-like creature wading through the water at chest level. And the creature was wading away from them. And so I said to them, what'd you do? And they said, well, we went fishing. In other words, in their cultural expectation, it wasn't unnatural to see a primate in the wild. And they had no idea that there were primates up here, they said. But it wasn't that unnatural for them. So they kept fishing. It wasn't a big deal for them. They didn't realize how important their story was, and the details were, how revealing it was that a creature, an ape-like creature, was seen up here by them. There are various sightings that form those confirmation moments. The Hong Kong Nationals, Cliff Sparks, seeing a creature on Green 1 in 1975, a year before the Abear Road incident. The Abear Road incident, which involved several law enforcement agencies. Dan Gordon, who was a policeman in 1982, sees a creature with his partner out by South Bay as they're turning around on patrol. So those sightings are very instrumental because they're kind of no-nonsense, straightforward, very honest, and from a personal level, we know all these people very well. And we know they're not hoaxers or known exaggerators. They're very respectable people. Back in the 1970s, the experience of a Bigfoot or the experience of seeing a lake monster was often a negative experience. Now it seems like the community embraces it. So it's a complete switch from the older days. And if you were a police officer in 1970 and saw something, you may not even mention it. Where now you might actually talk about it. So now we see that whole cultural shift in just the perception of these creatures. And it seems like there's a better understanding of the possibility of this being a real phenomena. And if you go from a social anthropological point of view, then this is a win-win because it's important to study why is that happening? Why do we see monsters? Why are we now embracing this with festivals? So I think it's a win-win. The whole topic should be studied.
You know, in terms of numbers of locals telling me, I would say in 2 years, I'm going to say at least 6 to 8. And I guess that doesn't sound like much. Maybe it sounds like a lot, but to me, that's a lot. And they all sound credible. It's not like one of them's whack, you know. They all sound very credible people. I really find it interesting when the natives come in here and tell me stories, especially the older ones that tell me about the elders and what they used to say. You know, don't go to the whistles, you know, when they're berry picking. There's little details that you pick up that was, you know, taught to these people at a very young age. So it's always interesting when somebody walks in and has a story for me. Hatcher Pass, the Willow Fishhook area, the Trapper Creek area, there's just miles of it. It's just, you can go and go and go in any direction. Sure, there's some main roads cut in there, but there's also a lot of ATV trails. There's a lot of hiking. You can just see, you guys were up there, it just goes on forever. But I think I don't know if it has an element of the gold miners see them a lot up there. I don't know if it's just because of the rocks or they have caves, I don't know. But it seems like there's something to do with trappers, and maybe it's just that those are the people that are going in the woods. But there seems to be a history of it in that area. And that is one of the areas that I've heard of that has had most of the reports is coming from that area.
And this whole valley is apparently owned by the Athabascans, and there's a word that they're saying, I've never written it down, I've never seen it written out, so it's hard for me to remember. But there's a couple gentlemen that I know of that can tell you what it is, but it basically means Valley of the Wild Man. And supposedly I heard that is why the Athabascans have not built anything back here, any kind of, structures, any kind of tourist shops or anything like that. Anyway, it's an interesting introduction to this valley because there are so many sightings up here. I stopped here because this is a plot of land. I met a gentleman up here years and years ago who had a lot of activity. And what had happened, you can't quite see it. We'll look at it around the corner. But there's a big, more or less a hotel, and it was the idea of three gentlemen to start a hotel here, and kind of an Alaska land. They'd rent four-wheelers. They'd do this anyway. They pulled out. It failed. The bank ended up owning the property. So my friend got the job as being caretaker for this property. Now there's 20 acres here. It's out here in the middle of nothing. There's a gate about 1,000 feet up that will close in the wintertime, so people can't drive through here. But this gentleman would hear wood knocks almost every night coming from this area right here.
Right here?
Right here. And I can tell you that because there's that old dilapidated, what used to be a tree fort. And I found it interesting when he was telling us up at the house up there, we walked down into this area, and that's the first thing I saw, and I thought, oh, that's kind of interesting, because there's this old dilapidated, it used to be a tree house, but there's old pieces of wood laying around, plenty of things for them, I guess, to grab and smack. But it was just kind of interesting that there was something there, and that's where the noises are coming from. And you can see the road here. You can hear, when you're up there, you can hear cars driving by here, and it's a very secluded place, especially towards the winter months. Nobody comes up here. So again, it's another strange thing that's happened up here. About another, we'll say maybe 2,000 feet up here, Dan, my friend that used to live here, found about a 17-inch track as well up there. One of my favorite stories that Dan told me while he was caretaking the facility was in the middle of winter. His kids had just got on that bus about 2 hours prior, went to school. There's nobody up here. The gate's locked. You can't even drive through here. He had no running water. He has no power. He had generators only. And so for entertainment, he would often sit in his truck, in his Ford Bronco, and with his laptop and watch movies. So one day he was sitting out in his Bronco watching a movie on his laptop, and nobody around, sunny day, it just snowed. It was a beautiful sunny day, but lots of snow around. And all of a sudden, a snowball hits his windshield. Like he explained that if his windshield wasn't there, the snowball would have hit him right in the head. And it was a big snowball too. It wasn't like a little tiny kid snowball or something. But it hit the windshield. It scared him to the point where he threw the laptop because it had been quiet for hours. He kind of went, swore, darn it. And he thought it was one of his friends, one of his few friends that live up here. He got out of his truck and he starts yelling. Nothing. Nobody around. Nobody said anything. He quickly kind of walked around down here. He looked. There was nobody around. No tracks. No trucks. No. Didn't hear any vehicles. So that was a head scratcher for him. And he still to this day does not know what or who threw that snowball. But it with all the other Sasquatch stories up here, it really makes you wonder. They throw rocks? Is it possible? Could they throw a snowball? I don't know, but it's one of my favorite stories from up here.
Wow.
It's amazing. There's one on the BFRO that goes way back about somebody seeing one on the highway that looked like an orangutan, I think, and it was just sitting on the highway. And I have a friend that had a similar encounter in a similar spot, and he said it looked like this person just sitting on the highway, and it's not the same report. This is a different guy, it's not the same guy. And I want to say he said it basically got up and walked into the tree line, and they couldn't figure out what the hell a person was doing, and they thought it didn't look like a person, but it walked on two legs, but it was just sitting in the middle of the road. I hope I get to hear a lot more stories, and maybe I'll get to hear some more hot spots, because you'll start recognizing it. People start talking about a certain area, and like I said, it's willows always come up. There's a lot of space up here. There's just open areas people have never been. everywhere. So you can see how something like this would thrive up here.
Hopefully you've enjoyed the video. For myself, it was fun to revisit these previous interviews and amazing locations I've had the chance to journey to over the last couple of years. In an upcoming video, we'll cover possible Sasquatch encounters and evidence we've gathered throughout our Bigfoot Beyond the Trail adventures. Be sure to stay tuned and enjoy the wide range of other documentaries and series available right here on the Small Town Monsters channel.